with us. So what has changed? I mean, should we be worried about these figures we're looking at just now?
We should be concerned. This is almost entirely predictable in what you and I talked about just a few months ago, and I unfortunately have one of those statistics. I'm 10 days on and I feel almost normal, but not completely. This is a nasty disease, even for those who are vaccinated and relatively fit and middle-aged or elderly, perhaps. But it is worse in some individuals. And those 20 in intensive care, 41 people died last week with COVID on their death certificate. We've got about 900 in hospital. So let's not underreact, but let's not overreact either, because vaccines, antivirals, we know what to do. So we're able to live with this in a different way than we could a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, we should point out with those hospital figures as well, some of them might be in with a broken leg and just happen to have tested positive for COVID. We don't know how many of them are there because of COVID.
Kind of. Yes, that's true, but would you rather have a broken leg with or without COVID? So COVID
probably, but it doesn't give it's not a good gauge of how ill it's making
It's a reasonable gauge, but if you've got a broken leg or diabetes or a stroke, everything is harder with COVID.
Yeah.
Your healing is tougher. Your chronic disease is tougher, but you're right. It's not that people go with a disease and nothing else. That's quite common.
So let me look at those stats then that we were just giving out. About 5% of the population has COVID or had COVID last week. It was a fraction of 1% of the population this time last year, and yet we were still living under restrictions. Why are we so relaxed now? Because we were quite well vaccinated a year ago, were we not?
Science is why we're more relaxed. I'm not relaxed. So to put this in perspective, you used two illustrations as you were talking. Glastonbury has 200,000 people in those fields. It looks like it goes for miles. Apparently you can run around Glastonbury in the morning and it's 30 miles.
Right.
That number of people in Scotland had this disease last week.
Yeah.
That number of people. So we should treat that very seriously. But we've got vaccination, antivirals, and we know how to protect one another a lot better than we did. The Lancet yesterday published the biggest study into vaccination globally. They say 20 million lives have been saved. That's more than have died. It has halved the mortality from this disease. It's absolutely remarkable. 20 million lives who would be dead who are now alive. The other thing we've got is antivirals. So if you'd had a heart transplant or you were going through chemotherapy and your vaccination therefore wasn't working because of what else we were doing to you, we now have drugs that can help you survive. That's remarkable science and has happened really quickly. So that's the big difference.
As a matter of interest, how do we know these figures? How accurate are these figures? People aren't testing anymore. Where'd you get the rates from?
We go to people's houses and we check them randomly. So we go round 30,000 houses and we PCR test them at the front door and take a blood test. And we do that across the whole of the UK, and we do 30,000 people a week. And we can then use fancy statistics, or boffins can use fancy statistics, ramp them up, and that gives us a number. It gives us an estimate. It's not absolutely accurate, but it's got a confidence interval that the statisticians give us, so we're pretty sure that that's the number. The other thing we do, it's a little bit early on a Sunday morning, we monitor wastewater sampling.
How does that work? I'm fascinated by that, because I mean it feels like a very blunt instrument, right? I'm thinking just dip a piece of litmus paper in the sewer, but it's what found polio in London, isn't it?
It's very, very clever. So not to be too indelicate, when you have a virus, you pee it out. We then look for that in the sewage works, and we can monitor that. We can give that a score of 1 or 10 or 100 or 105.
And is it accurate?
Very, very accurate. It's an early warning sign that Elgin or Brecon or Manchester is going to have a blip.
So it tells you where rather than how many?
It gives you some idea of scale, but it definitely tells you where. And we can do that around the world. We've got some of the best at that. We're now doing genetic surveillance of some of that. So we now know what variant we've got according to that sewage sampling.
Right. The First Minister was fairly clear in an interview, I think on Friday, saying that people should actually think about changing their behaviour now, get masks back on if you're going to be inside, just, start really putting this to the front of your mind again and taking precautions. Do you agree?
I do. I think there's 3 things you and I can do. Everybody in the country can do. Number 1 is get vaccinated. If you haven't been, if you've missed one, if you've just never thought about it, come. We want you to be vaccinated. It's the most important single thing you can do. Number 2, stay off if you're sick. So I didn't go to work this week. So I've had 10 days. I'm going to go back tomorrow. This is the first time pretty much I've been out of the house to see you. But stay off if you're sick and keep your kids off school if they're sick so that you don't spread it to people who may be more vulnerable than you. And third, think about those other protections, not just face coverings, but alcohol gel as you walk into a place, keeping your hands clean. If you're on a bus or a train or in a crowded environment, then pop that mask back on.
Scientists would suggest, right, that a cotton mask against Omicron certainly doesn't actually genuinely have that much effect. Or is what you're trying to do just create a mindset among the population? You see more physical barriers now across people's faces, so it just gets it back into people's heads?
Partly. Risk is quite difficult to explain on an individual level compared to a population. Face coverings at a population level work. They work. So if you can face cover a whole train, that works. If you've got one person in the corner of a train, you're right. That's probably not having that huge an effect on the numbers for Scotland. So if you can just get those things back in place, the alcohol gel, the keeping a little bit of distance and staying off your work if you're sick. That's the same instructions for norovirus, for flu. We shouldn't be going around with infectious disease.
Yeah, the thing is, though, I mean, the First Minister can ask the population all she likes, and she has a lot of support out there, that's undeniable, but actually people will not do this en masse. 10% might, but you don't get the 70% doing it unless you make them do it. Can you see a case for any kind of mandatory restrictions coming back?
I honestly don't think so. Something dramatic would have to happen to the virus. We've got fatigue from this. We're all a bit fed up. People are going back about their business. Glastonbury is on. Transmit's on next week. I remember us talking about Transmit a year ago. We were struggling to get it back on. So all of those things are really, really important to get back. But science, vaccination, staying off your work, face coverings, small prices to pay in order for us to get that society back.
Just quickly, while we still have you, are we prepared for another virus, another pandemic, whatever's next, another variant, another nasty variant? Are we in a good place now if the clouds start to gather again?
Yes, we are. Globally, we're in a much better place, although we need more global vaccination. Haiti, last time I looked, had vaccinated 2% of its population, so we need to solve that as a world. The WHO are taking the lead for that. We are as ready as we can be for whatever comes next, but we have to be vigilant. We have to know what's coming.
All right. Listen, that at least is reassuring. A lot of people will be feeling pretty grim this morning, 5% of the population statistically, but I'm glad to see you are back up and about, back to the office tomorrow. Thanks for being with us this morning, Professor Jason Leitch. Right, a quick look across the front pages this morning confirms there are a whole variety of pretty weighty stories knocking about, some of them the ones we have been discussing this morning. There is, though, another story that's not really going away. Here's the front page of the Sunday Mail. Sex shame MP faces cop quiz. SNP's Patrick Grady being investigated now by police over sex assault claims. Andrew Kerr, our political correspondent, is with us this morning. This has caused quite a bit of problems within the SNP, hasn't it? They won't be happy that it's not going away.
It has, Martin.
I should say, sorry, Andrew, we asked the SNP for an interview on this morning. We were told that discussing the case any further would breach confidentiality. They might not be willing to discuss it, but plenty of other people still want to talk about it.
And we stand on the edge of a huge political week in politics, Martin, and the Grady affair is really starting to overshadow that. Yesterday, we'd want to hear from the SNP, perhaps setting out their hopes and visions of independence. But we have the Grady story today, and we've heard from the SNP just before coming on air that Patrick Grady is stepping away from his party membership while the police inquiry continues. So that means that he won't be an SNP MP during the foreseeable time of the police inquiry. So this is really affecting the party, and of course, still questions about Ian Blackford, the SNP Westminster leader, and his leadership of the party down there, and questions for the First Minister too about how this whole affair has indeed been handled over the past few years.
Yeah, we don't want to go too deep into the story politically because there are legal issues now that police are investigating, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, it is. It's a problem that's not leaving them, is it? It's going to be a cause of some concern, and for Ian Blackford as much as anybody, right?
It really will be, because I mean, one columnist is writing in the Sunday Times today that Mr. Blackford's position is now untenable. The opposition are, of course, saying that, but perhaps maybe even some in his own SNP Westminster grouping are perhaps saying that to themselves as well.
Yeah, exactly. Another issue, talking the SNP, independence, the route map for independence. Long awaited. We don't have to wait much longer, though. Tuesday is when Nicola Sturgeon is going to set that out to Parliament. No doubt a fairly prolonged row will follow. What do we expect?
Yeah, this is indeed really exciting. We've had the paper setting out the perceived benefits in the SNP's view, and then we will get that statement from the First Minister in Parliament. Nicola Sturgeon is saying today that independence is essential to tackling the cost of living crisis. So how do we go about it? How might they deliver a referendum that will be legal? Well, could it be about trying to have a referendum on gaining additional powers for Holyrood, extend the Parliament's powers to enable independence to be achieved? Well, that's really interesting, but will it pass scrutiny? Will it pass the legal test from the presiding officer, from the Supreme Court perhaps? But there are also questions for the pro-union side as well. You were speaking to Douglas Ross there. He was talking about a pretend referendum, and Nicola Sturgeon should stick to the gold standard that we had in 2014. Well, Alex Salmond, the Alpha
Which, of course, she's being denied by his party.
She's being denied by that. But, of course, Mr Salmond is saying, well, actually move away from what is perceived as the gold standard. So it's really interesting to see what might happen. You were making the point about the UN right of self-determination. There's a phrase, you know, there's a prison we're in which no democratic key can unlock. That's the pro-yes side that say that. But apparently the UN rights and self-determination maybe doesn't apply to developed Western democracies. So this is going to be really tricky, a really exciting time for Scottish politics. But of course, coming out this time, the final week in Parliament, not that much time for scrutiny, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, a busy week, no doubt, for you and your brethren within the parliamentary media unit. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning. I know you've got loads more to do. There is lots more in the papers that will be discussed in great detail on the radio. If you're watching on the television, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. This is where you leave us. If you're listening on the radio, as I said, loads more to come right through to midday. Here's Andrew Black.